Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. It happens every time the IRS publishes a revised version of the Form W-9. Vendors and maybe even your own internal team members push back because they don't want to complete the new form when they can't see why you can't just accept the old one, especially when their information has not changed. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 304, IRS Form W-9 series, getting pushback for requiring the new form. So in case you didn't know, the IRS published a revised version of the Form W-9, and that revised version was dated March 2024, and it was published March 6, 2024. That means that it was in play and immediately took effect. It's not like it has a grace period like the Form W-8 series where they give you that 6-month grace period, but you don't have that with the Form W-9. And so it is immediately available and required to be collected. Now, you might have a little bit of leeway on this, and I'll talk about that because this is the most frequent question that I have gotten from subscribers, listeners, clients since the Form W-9, the March 2024 version was when it was first published. And so I wanted to address that as part of this series. And what I'm saying, I am taking from my IRS W-9 training session that is it was originally set up to be, it's called IRS W-9 Examples by Tax Classification, what to look for when accepting from your vendor. So it was really set up for that. But now that the W-9 has been updated, it has all of the updates included in the training session. And I always get this same question, the topic of this podcast, in those training sessions too. And it's just one of the most popular questions that I'm getting. So I thought I would make it a part of this series. Now, the response to this, again, it's in the training session, but I wanted to just clarify here that I am not a tax professional. I really talk about the W-9 and its acceptance from a vendor setup and maintenance or vendor team perspective, because if you think about it, we really don't get any instruction on how to complete the W-9 because the vendors don't always know how to complete it. But what I found with my team members when I was a practitioner is that when they received it, they didn't know if the vendor knew how to fill it out right. And so that's where this training comes from. And so if you're interested in that, I will put that training session link in the show notes. But to answer this question directly, there are a couple of different options that I always give the folks that I respond back to when they ask it. So the first thing is that, right, I know you and all other vendor team members have been getting pushback from those vendors that have been using that same paper electronic copy of the W-9 since October 2018 or whenever they stopped pushing back on that one and actually filled out the most recent one. Because if you think about it, they've gone, almost 6 years with that same W-9 that probably somebody from their tax team gave them. They left it or saved it, either hard copy and or on their computer. So anytime anybody asks for it, they can just give them that W-9. So they check the box. And why are you, right, when their information hasn't changed, asking them for a new one? Because you don't need it anyway, right? They don't understand why we need it, especially if they are a corporation or one of the tax classes that's non-reportable, even though they may be reportable, but not everybody knows why or what the circumstances are. So you still need to collect it. But anyway, they get the pushback, and because they really don't want, the vendors or the internals don't want to waste time completing that new form, even though the October 2018 version has been retired and is no longer acceptable. So what I tell these frustrated professionals that really needed an answer is I talk to them about a little bit of a leeway, right? So yes, the IRS publishes the form. It is immediately effective, and so you should be immediately collecting it. But there may be some leeway if you choose to give that leeway to the vendor. And that is one for payments that would be reportable on the 1099 MISC or 1099 NEC. As of right now, a certified 10 is not required. Now, there are regulations, proposed regulations out there to make it required, but as of right now, it is not required. And that means that you don't have to have a signed W-9. And if you don't have to have a signed W-9, that really means you don't have to collect it. Per the IRS, what's really required now is that you collect a valid 10, a valid taxpayer ID number, right? So that means you can collect it over the phone. That means you can collect it via email, which is really not bad because it's risky for fraud. So don't do that, but you could do it. And as long as you did the IRS 10 match and it's valid, then you won't be dinged, or you shouldn't be dinged if you ever have an audit. Now, the second thing is that if you have payments that would be reportable on any other 1099, or you have payments, or you are collecting the W-9 in a B notice situation, which means you filed 1099 tax filing with the IRS and you use a legal name tax ID combination for the vendor or vendors that did not match IRS records, and the IRS sent that vendor on a list of vendors on a CP2100, CP2100A notification. That means you've got to reach out to them and collect a W-9 and a new W-9, and you have to use specific verbiage that is the B notice. If you're collecting it for that purpose, or any other 1099 besides the 1099 MISC or 1099 NEC, then a certified 10 is required. And that means you have to collect the most current version of the form, which again is March 2024. Now, again, I am not a tax professional, so you might want to check with your tax professional, your leadership or legal team to verify this. But the bottom line is, if the IRS ever audits you and you have not collected a certified 10 where required on the W-9 on the right version of the form, then your company could be fined. And if you don't know what your vendor is going to ultimately be paid for, because a lot of times we don't have the relationships with the vendors, how do you know that their payments will be on a 1099 MISC or 1099 NEC? So my recommendation would be to always collect a a W-9 with a certified 10 with a signature on it, but I know that's not realistic in all cases. So you do have a bit of a leeway based on where the payments would be reportable if they were reportable. That's if you need leeway. And I would actually do that on a case-by-case basis. Require the most current version of the form and require that it be signed, because not only one, you may not know what they're ultimately going to be paid for. And number two, you just want to make sure you're putting obstacles in the way of would-be fraudsters so they don't get set up in your vendor master file and then send a fake invoice for you to pay that fake vendor. So you want to make sure that vendor is real. You want to make sure that you're putting obstacles in the way of fraudsters. So my recommendation, always collect the most updated version of the W-9. From all vendors, but if you need some leeway because you're getting pushback, then see if that is something that you can look at on a case-by-case basis to just collect the tax ID and do the IRS 10 match. The other thing, though, that I end my recommendation with is you do need to require the current version of the form, right, to protect your company in case of an IRS audit, even though if you're not required to collect it because you don't need a certified 10, you should still be fine. Check with your tax professional. But what I would do is get support from leadership in the form of a sign off on an updated vendor policy that states what's required. And that is the most recent version of the form. You could even put a picture on it of it. You can make sure you put the current version revision date, which again is March 2024, or maybe even a special declaration or whatever you want to call it that includes that requirement. Just make sure it has management sign off so that you have support from management. Because I will tell you, when I was a practitioner and we were collecting W-9s and the IRS would update the form, and they used to do that. For a period there, they would do it almost every year from 2013 to 2014, also from 2017 to 2018, right? They came out with new versions. And so that was always a difficult time. And so if we did not require, or if we required the most recent version of the form, they would sometimes escalate it and go above our heads to leadership. But if you haven't signed off on a policy or some type of declaration or whatever you want to call it, and then give that to the folks that are giving you pushback, because sometimes the internals are worse than the vendors, that might also help. It also helps in the fact that if someone does reach out to your leadership team and requests that they not be required to submit the most recent version of the form, your leadership can't give them that, can't allow them to do that because they signed off on the policy or the special declaration or whatever it is you called it. Anyway, that's my viewpoint. I hope it helps you a bit with, like, on a case-by-case basis, whether or not to enforce, right, the new W-9 when the vendors and your internal team members are not cooperating. All right, so I hope that helped. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 304th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.